Horn-Banach theorem. What I will do is I will look at very briefly and quickly introduce to the major theorems in nonlinear space. Then we will look at as we go along where they come into play. Okay, as we proceed. So therefore, I look at some of the fundamental theorems when you deal with nonlinear space. The first one is the Horn-Banach theorem. Now let me make some preliminaries for the next theorem that I am aiming at. Okay, so the Horn-Banach theorem dealt with functionals. Now I am going to look at general transformations, bounded transformations. So our next theorem will be something to do with more general than functionals, about bounded linear transformations. So to begin with, and this is a very useful theorem, and if you are going to do solving functional equations like differential equations, integral equations, any sort of functional equation, linear, when you are trying to invert things, okay, this is basically a theorem on invert. So therefore, let's look at the first level start with two non-empty sets. Okay, so consider two non-empty sets, and you have a function. So let f mapping x to y be a map from x to y. It's a code which codes x elements as y elements. Okay. Then we know that if we want to get an inverse transformation, then f must be both 1 1 and onto, what's known as bijective. Okay, so we can define f inverse y to x if and only if f is 1 1 and onto. So that's fundamentally, therefore, minimum requirement if you want to talk about inverse maps is that the original map must be 1 1 and onto. Okay. Now let us look at a second level. Suppose I have x and y as vector spaces. Okay, x and y are vector space. They are more structure. Previously it was just raw sets. Now these sets are really more structure. They are all vector space structures. So therefore x and y are, let me say, finite dimensional. Even among vector spaces, we will look at finite dimensional vector spaces over f, over some field f. And whenever you have vector spaces, you would like to look at transformations which preserve the structure, which means linear transformations. So let f mapping x to y be a linear transformation. Okay. So now I am looking at better structure for the domain and the codomain, namely vector space structure, and better structure for the function that I am talking about, namely linearity. So I am looking at a linear transformation from a vector space x to a vector space y, and I would like to look at inverse. Of course, even to start thinking about inverse, this must be 1 1 and onto, otherwise there is no question of even coming back from y to x. But let us look at this a little bit more carefully. So a priori, to talk of inverse, we need f to be 1 1 and onto. So let us say we have 1 1 onto map. If we have a 1 1 onto map, then the inverse is defined, and the linearity of F forces the inverse also to be a linear transformation from the Y trans to X. Then in such a case, the linearity of F forces F inverse from Y to X also a linear, or forces linearity on the map F inverse Y to X. So automatically it is given to you. The moment you are given 1, 1 and R2, you can define inverse map, and that map automatically carries its the property of linearity. So if you have a linear transformation from one vector space to another, and if that linear transformation is 1, 1 and on 2, then automatically the inverse is forced to be a linear transformation. Okay. So you don't have to do any extra work to get the inverse to be linear. Okay. So therefore, in order to talk about inverse, we need 1, 1 and on 2. Again, nothing more is needed. Nothing more is needed. 1, 1 on 2 inverse gets, and the linearity structure is automatically preserved. Okay. So therefore, now, therefore, suppose F is 1, 1 on 2. Otherwise, there is not even no chance even of talking of inverse. Then the onto says, then onto means what? The range of F must be equal to all of Y. That's what is meant by onto. The whole thing is covered by F. But the dimension of the range of F is called the rank of F. So that says the dimension of the range of F is equal to dimension of Y. But the dimension of the range of F is what is called as the rank. So let's say the rank of the linear transformation. If you think of this as the n-dimensional space, this is another m-dimensional space, this is a matrix, then this is the same rank and nullity. So this is the rank of F is dimension of Y. But then we have a theorem which says that the rank plus nullity is equal to the dimension of the domain space. Okay. But by rank nullity theorem for finite dimensional spaces, we have this. It is a very innocuous looking simple theorem. Okay. Very useful. We have rank of F plus nullity of F is equal to dimension of what? Dimension of X. Rank plus nullity equal to the number of columns, which is the dimension of the domain space. Okay. But now rank of F is dimension of Y. So dimension of Y plus nullity of F is equal to dimension of X. So the one-oneness says that the dimension of Y plus nullity of F must be equal to dimension of X. Onto. But one-oneness says the null space can consist only of the 0 vector. Nobody else can go to 0 because it is 1, 1. But F is 1, 1 implies null space A, null space F is just the 0 vector. That says nullity F is 0. The dimension of the null space is 0. And therefore what does this say? Dimension of Y must be equal to dimension of x. So therefore, there is no chance of you are talking an inverse if the dimension of y is not equal to dimension of x. If the dimension of y is not equal to dimension of x, then f cannot be even chance of being 1 1 and onto, both 1 1 and onto. So therefore, if you are going to talk of an inverse map from a vector space to another vector space, you can even think of talking about this only if the domain and the codomain have the same dimension. Okay. So therefore, let us look at same dimension. So therefore, there is no chance of talking about an inverse of a linear transformation between two finite dimensional vector spaces of different dimension. Okay, so a different dimension, no hope of 1 1 another, because if it is 1 1 another, it has to be the dimension of the two spaces be the same. So therefore, we have to talk about, look at only such cases. So therefore, let dimension x equal to dimension y. Then what do I get from here? This is onto always means this, but then if dimension x is equal to dimension y, that says nullity f is 0. So onto implies 1 1 automatically. Okay. So if f is onto implies by star rank f, or what is the dimension of y plus nullity f is equal to dimension x, which implies nullity f is 0, because now dimension x is equal to dimension y, that says f is 1 1. Right? So onto means 1 1. If you have a linear transformation from a 10 dimensional space to another 10 dimensional space, if it is 1 1, if it is onto, it has to be 1 1 automatically. So any onto linear transformation between two finite dimensional vector spaces of the same dimension must necessarily be 1 1. On the other hand, if it were 1 1, nullity will be 0. Rank nullity theorem will say rank of f is the dimension of v, but rank of f is dimension of y because it is onto, and so on. Okay, so let me put it this way. Conversely, f is 1 1 implies f is onto, because nullity is 0, rank plus nullity is dimension y, so rank is equal to dimension of x, but dimension of y therefore is equal to the dimension of x, and we are done. Okay. Dimension of the range is equal to dimension of x, the y therefore it is onto. So f is 1 1. Therefore, if we have a linear transformation between two finite dimensional vector spaces of the same dimension, then 1 1 and onto are synonymous. One implies the other. So therefore, I will now erase all this. Finite dimensional vector spaces of the same dimension then f mapping x to y linear is 1 1 if and only if onto. Therefore, a 1-1 map will automatically have an inverse, or an onto map will automatically have an inverse, and the inverse is automatically linear. So therefore, in this case, therefore a 1-1 linear transformation will have a linear inverse. So that's the next step, from just raw sets to what we should be, what is the correct statement for finite dimensional spaces between two finite dimensional spaces of the same dimension. In particular, if x is equal to y, then we have linear operators. Okay? Therefore, a linear operator is invertible if and only if it's 1-1. That's all it says. A linear operator in a finite dimensional space is invertible if and only if it is 1-1. So, in particular, a linear operator, okay, in particular by let me write it, in particular by taking x equal to y, we get a linear operator on a finite dimensional vector space is invertible as if and only if it is linear, it is 1-1, and in that case the inverse also is linear, is also linear. Okay, so that's the next step. But then if we take the two dimensions not same and if both are finite dimensional, 1-1 and R2 are different. If I had finite dimensional spaces x and y with different dimensions, then 1-1ness and onto are different concepts. They are not synonymous. Okay, so now let us go more specifically to infinite dimensional spaces. Now what do we mean by saying they are same dimension or not? Everything is infinity, so there is a mesh there. So we have to look at it very carefully. So let x and y be two infinite dimensional vector spaces over F. I am looking at two infinite dimensional vector spaces, and let F mapping x to y be a linear transformation. So I have a linear transformation now between two infinite dimensional spaces. Okay. Now again, if you want to talk of inverse, a priori you always need 1-1 and onto. It so happened in finite dimensional case one means the other, so the other one could be removed. So in general, again a priori to talk of inverse of F, we need F to be 1-1 and onto. And in that case, the linearity of, again and again I will write it, the linearity of F forces linearity of F inverse. Okay, so if you have two infinite dimensional vector spaces and if I have 1-1 onto map, then the inverse automatically comes through, and the inverse I don't even have to check, it will always be linear. That is forced. The linearity of F forces the inverse transformation also to be linear. Okay. But however, what do we mean by will something like this hold? That is, if the dimensions are the same, will then 1 1 mean on 2? In particular, for example, if I take x equal to y, definitely the dimensions are the same, the spaces are the same. Will 1 1 mean on 2? So therefore, let's look at this. So if x and y have same dimension, what do you mean by same dimension now? That is, you have a basis for x, you have a basis for y. Suppose both are finite dimensional, when do we say they have the same dimension? This basis must have the same number of vectors as that basis. But when you go to infinite situation, I have one basis which is infinite, another basis for y which is infinite. What do you mean by saying they have the same number? They must have the same cardinality. That means they must be isomorphic to each other. There should be a 1-1 correspondence between the vectors in this basis and the vectors in that basis. That's what is meant by I am saying they have the same dimension. Will 1 1 mean be synonymous with onto? No. In particular, if x equal to y is this. In x equal to y there is no question, both are same spaces, therefore the same dimension. So will 1 1 mean onto? So let's look at some examples to show that the situation is different when you go to infinite dimensional spaces. So in order to even not be confused by being the same dimension, we will take the same space itself. So there is no question of the dimensions being comparable or anything. So let's take example 1. Let's take x to be our L2R. This is the infinite sequences such that the sum of the squares of the components is less than infinity, and take that to be equal to y. Let us take this obviously an infinite dimensional space, because 1 0 0 0 1 0 0 0 0 1 they are all linearly independent vectors. So there is this is an infinite dimensional space, and now let's define f mapping x to x as follows. So first of all, what should any transformation from x to x do? Take a vector in x and code it as another vector in x. So for any x is x1, x2, etc. in capital X, we define the code. What is the code? We have code of x. The f code of x should be another vector which should be derived from the original word, and if this is the word of infinite lengthen, the coded word is just shifted, right shift. The coded word is right shift. Okay. Now make sure that this is also in x. For that we must make sure that the sum of the squares is finite. But what is the sum of the squares? It is the same as the original one. The original one was finite, so we have not altered the energy or whatever you want to call it. Okay, it is the same. It's a code, but like the Fourier transform. The Fourier transform is a code, but it doesn't change the energy if you adjust the constants properly. Okay, in the definition. Okay, so then f is a map from x to x clearly, and it is also linear because the sums will go to the corresponding sums here and any constant multiple will correspondingly shift to the constant multiple. So, it is obviously a linear transformation. Clearly it is not 1 1, and clearly it is not onto, because if I want the first component non-zero, I can never get it. Okay. So, clearly f is not onto, because the vector E1 equal to 1 0 0 etc. belongs to L2 R, but E1 does not belong to range of f, because in the range of f all first components must be 0, and this fellow is not there. So, it is not onto, but f is 1 1. Why is f is 1 1? If fx equal to fy, then 0 x1 x2 is the same as 0 y1 y2. So, x1 must be equal to y1, x2 must be equal to y2, x3 must be equal to y3, and so on. So, therefore, it says fx equal to fy implies 0 x1 x2 etc. is equal to 0 y1 y2 etc., which implies xj is equal to yj for all j, which implies x equal to y1. Therefore, f is 1 1. The two values can be same only if the two arguments are the same. So, therefore, we have a function now which is 1 1 but not onto. So, they are not synonymous, even though the dimensions are the same. Both are same spaces in fact, and still 1 1ness does not mean onto. So, therefore, 1 1 does not imply onto. In general, it is very rare to get 1 1 imply onto in vector space mappings. That happens only when the two dimensions are the same and they are finite dimensional. In infinite dimensional, it does not work. It works only in finite dimensional, and that too when both have the same dimension. Let me give another example. Example 2, it is the same again situation. Take the same spaces and then define x to x as, now the code of x, previously we shifted to the right, let me shift it to the left. Now what about this function? It's linear, now it is onto, because any vector can be caught as the image of some fellow, but it is not 1 1, because you give any value for the first component and 0 to all the components, they all go to 0. So, this is f is onto, clearly f is onto, but f of alpha 0 0 0 0 is equal to theta x for every alpha in R. Therefore, f is not 1 1. Many vectors go to the 0 vector. So, f is not 1 1. Therefore, onto also does not imply. So, in infinite dimensional situations, even if the spaces are the domain and codomain are same, these two terms 1 1 and onto are totally independent concepts. One does not imply the other. Right. So, therefore, now let us come back to this. Therefore, when you have this, in general, for any linear transformation f mapping x to y, 1 1 does not imply onto, and onto does not imply 1 1. Therefore, for f inverse to exist, we must have both 1, 1, both have to be checked, and in this case again and again I will write this linearity of F, forces linearity on F inverse. Okay, so that's the three situations. We have the raw set, then finite dimensional vector spaces, then the situation of the infinite dimensional vector spaces. Now let us give more structure. Let us make these as non-linear spaces. Okay, so we are going to give more structure. So let X and Y, let me call this as X norm and Y norm, be non-linear spaces. Now what would I like? I will talk about not only linear transformations but bounded linear, continuous linear transformation, because I have the norm structure. So I have an additional structure, and let F mapping X be a bounded linear transformation. And when I have such a bounded linear transformation, I want inverse. And when I want inverse, I want the inverse to be linear. I want the inverse also to be continuous. So we want to look at the possibility of defining an inverse, F inverse, which is a bounded linear transformation. Now from Y to X, or I should write the two norm linear spaces, from Y norm Y to norm X norm X. The inverse must go that side. Okay. So previously, first we had only sets, so only functions. Then we had linear transformation because of vector space, we want inverse linear transformations. Now we have bounded linear transformations, we want inverse bounded linear transformations. Okay, so that's the final question. Okay. I mean, not really the final question. But there is a very interesting thing about this final. This is the first time I am doing a bit of digression in this class. I think I have been very serious. Okay. You know this title, the final problem. Have you heard of it? How many of you read Sherlock Holmes? Anybody has read Sherlock Holmes? Very strange. Okay. Anybody reads? Forget about Sherlock. So the Sherlock Holmes, the very popular character is Dr. Watson, MD. Okay, heard of him? Dr. Watson, MD. At the end of which, almost every novel, Sherlock Holmes will say, "It's very elementary, my dear Watson." Right?
The problem is with Dr. Moriarty.
Right. So basically, what the final, basically the novel that Sherlock Holmes wrote was, it was like a memoir that Dr. Watson himself writes about Sherlock Holmes. And then in that, the final mystery that Sherlock Holmes solves, he calls it the final problem. Okay, so that is essentially almost like the end of Sherlock Holmes. Okay. And in the words of Mr. Watson, Dr. Watson himself. But surprisingly, when Ramanujan was about 2 months before his death, after returning from England. He was in more or less his deathbed, and he died on April 20, I guess, April 20, 19, what? Which year? 1920, to sometime April 26, 1920 or something like that. But 2 months before that, on January 16th, he wrote a letter to Hardy, his mentor. I'm sorry I have not written to you all these days. One line like that formally. Then immediately he says, I have introduced what is known as Mach theta functions, which naturally enter mathematics. That was his letter. Then the rest of it is some 6 pages of identities, one after the other, and asymptotics and things like that. And this letter was sent to Hardy, and within a few days he died, and Hardy probably was already over the hill by that time, or probably even he also didn't take it seriously, maybe couldn't do much about it. And then then there was another British mathematician by name Watson, G.N. Watson. That is the other Watson, not the Watson MD, but the Watson PhD. Okay. And this Watson was the president of the London Mathematical Society, and his term was coming to an end. So every president before that gives a valedictory address at the end of his term. So Watson was about to give the valedictory address, and generally the practice was for the president to look at what was the goal set by the previous generation of presidents and what he has been able to achieve towards reaching those goals. What are his contributions? But then Watson started with the statement that this is generally how valedictory addresses are, but I am going to make a deviation. Okay, I am going to talk about the last letter of Ramanujan. And what other better title can I find for this than my friend Dr. Watson's The Final Problem. Okay, so it's like the final mystery that Ramanujan left for us with all those identities. Incidentally, probably now that I started this, let me say a few more things. Apparently the mystery of the letter was, one, all those identities and asymptotics that he talked there, nobody knew what these are all about. Second thing was, it's more mysterious was his remark that they appear naturally in mathematics. This whole thing, they don't even know what it means. Okay, he says it naturally occurs in mathematics. And so therefore 15 years after Ramanujan's death, when Watson gave this lecture, he talked about one or two of the identities that Ramanujan had mentioned in that letter. Before that, I want to mention this, 5 years before Watson, that is 10 years after Ramanujan's death, a high school student by name Zellberg, who later became a very famous mathematician, when he was a high school student, he probably was the first to write 2 papers on this Ramanujan's Mach theta function. Very first man to make something in public about the Ramanujan's letters and the identities there. Subsequently it was Watson, but several years passed, nothing happened. Then the lost notebook was found, and that gave them some clue, but still mysterious. I think probably in a sense a large part of the mystery of those 2 comments, particularly that comment this occur naturally, was resolved by another young fellow about 10 years back maybe, that is about 82 years after Ramanujan's death and 86 years after the letter was written, by a PhD thesis in Netherlands, in the University of Utrecht, okay, by a fellow by name Zwijger. Okay. That introduces what is known as real analytic modular forms, etc., etc. That is where the The modular forms which everybody knew, but the real analytic modular forms was what Ramanujan was talking about. It took a long time to understand. So that was the final problem, because there was no comparison to that final problem. Okay, so this was our question. So can we define a bounded linear inverse? Under what circumstances this happens? Okay, so let us again look at some examples. Okay, first of all, again and again, a priori there is no hope unless f is 1, 1 and onto. We have seen in the general, if you have a general infinite dimensional vector spaces, there is, unless you have 1, 1 and both 1, 1 and onto, there is no hope of defining even an inverse. But once you had that, the linearity forces linearity of the inverse. So let me now write somewhere. I have exhausted all the, I will get back to the first board. Again, a priori, to define f inverse, we need f to be 1, 1 and onto. If this is so, if this is true, then linearity of f forces linearity on f inverse. So one hope is probably the boundedness of f forces boundedness of f inverse. So does boundedness of f force boundedness of f inverse? If so, then we have succeeded. If 1, 1 and onto we have, then inverse is there, it is linear, boundedness, everything we get. So the question therefore is, does boundedness force boundedness? Let's look at some examples. So let us look at, I will give you first a very simple example. Now, unless you look at infinite dimensional spaces, the things are not interesting in a sense. Okay, so let's look at some very simple infinite dimensional spaces. You will see why I am not taking the examples that I had. Anyway, let us look at first x to be C01. What is C01? The set of all continuous functions defined on the interval 0, 1. Okay, and real valued. So I'll just only once I'll write this, real valued continuous functions on 0, 1. And what is the norm for f belonging to C01? We define norm f infinity to be equal to, because it is a continuous function of 0, 1, it has a maximum and the modulus has a maximum and a minimum. So we define it to be the maximum of the modulus of f of x as x varies between 0 and 1. So let us take the vector space x to be this. So therefore the non-linear space that I am looking at is this non-linear space. So let me take this also to be y. So I am going to take both x norm x and y norm. So I am looking at the same spaces. Again, you see the dimension problem is not at all there. Both are same spaces. Now define f mapping x norm x to y norm y, which is again x norm x, because y and x are the same spaces as, okay, I will should let me call it a, okay, I want. So now what should f do? F must take a fellow from this capital X, which means if f must take a continuous function and map it onto another continuous function. So it codes continuous functions as continuous. In other words, it codes a continuous path as another path. Okay, hashes it into another path. So therefore, we define it as follows. If so there are too many f's, right? So I will call it as x belongs to C, and let me call it as norm x infinity 0 less than or equal to t. I will use the variable t, and then this. Okay. Now I call the functions as x of t. Okay. So because I use the letter f for the transformation, so I will continue with that letter. So f of for xt belonging to C01, we define f of x must be a function, therefore I must tell what its value at point t is. So f of x must be another function, and I must tell what its value at the point t is. It is simply obtained by multiplying the value of the original function by e to the t side. So what I am doing is I am caught of hiding every function xt by multiplying it by at every point the value by e to the t. So the whole function got clouded into a different code. The original path was like this, but a new path will be like this. It will be higher that side. As t increases, it pulled up further. At each point, I am pulling up the function by the level of e to the t. So that is my new function. So now I want to make sure clearly it is linear. First of all, clearly it maps continuous functions to continuous functions. If xt is continuous, et is obviously continuous. So et times x to the power of x of t is also continuous. So clearly f maps C01 functions to C01 functions. So that's no problem. It's a function from there to there. Clearly it's linear because f of x plus y is e to the t into xt plus yt, which is e to the xt plus e to the yt, and constants are also multiplied. So clearly f is linear. Is bounded. So let us look at f of x t modulus. The modulus of the coded version. The modulus of the coded version is the modulus of e to the t x of t. Now, what is the maximum of e to the t? E to the power of 1, okay, times mod xt. But mod xt is less than or equal to its maximum. Its maximum is what is known as the mod x is less than or equal to its maximum. So what it says is this coded function can never exceed this value. The coded function can never exceed the value e times the length of x, and therefore the maximum of this cannot exceed this. So therefore maximum 0 less than or equal to t less than or equal to 1 f of x of t modulus is less than that. Okay, the coded function at every point t should be below this line. Therefore, the maximum could not have crossed that barrier, and that maximum is what is called the norm of the coded function. The norm of the coded function is less than or equal to e times the norm of the original function. What does that mean? When a mapping is called bounded, if the changed length is less than or equal to a constant times the original length. That's precisely the mean. So therefore, in fact, okay, I will not get exact computation. Therefore, which implies f is bounded and the norm of the mapping is less than or equal to E. Okay. What is the norm of the mapping? It is equal to the supremum of norm of f of x divided by norm of x not equal to the 0 function, and x, because both are same spaces, it is x of x. Okay, so that is less than or equal to E. So therefore f is a bound. So therefore I have now an example of a transformation from x to x, where x is my C01, which is linear and which is bounded. Therefore f is bounded linear operator, in fact, because it maps the same space. So f is a bounded linear operator. So question is, what about inverse? I will go through this carefully. The inverse means, first of all, a priori I need 1 1 and onto. Is it 1 1? If two fellows have the same code, then e to the t xt must be equal to e to the t yt. E to the t is non-vanishing, so I can cancel it. So xt equal to yt at all points. So x is equal to y. So that's what is meant by clearly 1 1. Clearly f is 1 1. Is it onto? That is, give me some function. Will that be the code of somebody? What is meant by some onto? All the codes are exhausted. If you give me a continuous function y, will there be a function x whose code is this? Certainly it is e to the minus t y. So therefore, again clearly onto. Therefore, f inverse exists as a linear transformation, because the moment it is 1 1 and onto, a linearity is forced. What we are examining now is whether boundedness is forced on that. Let us look at this. Now, what is f inverse of y for any y belonging to x? It's a function. Its value at any point t is e to the minus t yt. For any function, its value is e to the minus t yt. And therefore, what about mod if inverse y t is equal to e to the minus t is non-negative, so it is yt. Again, now what is the maximum value of e to the minus t in 0 1? 1 now, because it starts at 1 and goes on dropping e to the minus t. So that is less than or equal to mod yt, which is less than or equal to its maximum. So this inverse code, that function at every point it is less than or equal to this constant. Therefore maximum of f inverse of y of t is less than or equal to norm y infinity, where the maximum is over. But that is precisely the norm of f inverse of y infinity. That says the changed length is less than or equal to 1 times the original length, and therefore f inverse is bounded. So here is an example where we got the f inverse also as bounded. But let's not jump to conclusion by one example. Okay, we have to see whether this works. Now I will give you another example. I will quickly go through this example. Okay, I will give you an easier example so that we will do next time. So let me now take x to be again C0, 1. Again the norm of x to be the maximum of mod xt. The same situation. So that is my x space. So I am going to look at, so this is my norm of xx. Okay. The norm of xx is equal to norm x infinity. Now I am going to look at a different space. Now I am not going to look at continuous functions, but I am going to look at continuously differentiable functions, more smoother than these functions, but they are part of this. They are not only continuous but also differentiable, so it's inside this. Okay. But then I want to, among that I will look at those functions which are 0 at 0. You will see why I want that. Okay. So I am going to look at y to be C1001. What is this? This is all those functions which are first of all continuous such that f is differentiable, continuously differentiable, and f0 equal to, I will call it x. All those functions such that x0 is 0. So they are all those paths which start at origin at time t equal to 0, and then they are nice smooth paths. They are differentiable paths, so that the tangent is defined at every point. Okay. So therefore these are the paths which you can draw without lifting the pencil. Okay. At every moment we know which direction we have to move because the derivative exists. Okay, so now what I am going to do is define. So this is what my what is the norm here? Norm of x in the y space is again maximum 0 less than or equal to t less than or equal to 1 mod xt. Because after all they are part of the big space. The same norm will work here also. That norm was a norm in the whole space. That norm measures the length in the whole space, so even the smaller part it will measure the length. So same norm I am going to use, but set is different. So define f mapping x space to the y space as follows. What should f do? We should take a continuous function, map it to something else, another function. So f of x at any point t is defined as 0 to t, say x of u du. First of all, does it make sense? X is a continuous function, therefore the integral is well defined, no problem. Continuous functions, the indefinite integral is well defined, and the indefinite integral is much more smoother. Integration is a smoothening process. You started off with a continuous function and you integrate it, the indefinite integral will be differentiable. Okay, it makes it further smooth, and therefore this definitely takes continuous functions to differentiable functions, and the coded function at the point t equal to 0 will be precisely 0, and that is the condition I want. The coded function must be in the y space, so therefore it must be 0 at 0. So clearly f maps x to 1. And now it's linear because integration is a linear operation. Integration of a sum is the sum of the integral, and constants can be pulled up the integral. So clearly f is linear. What about boundedness? Let's again calculate f of x at t modulus we want to show that the maximum of this is finite. That is what he meant by saying it's a bounded function. So, but this is equal to modulus of integral 0 to x, 0 to t, xu, but that is less than or equal to integral 0 to t mod xu du. The integral modulus of the integral is less than or equal to integral of the modulus. Now the modulus of x is less than or equal to its maximum. So I can pull it out and compare it with the maximum integral, and that is mod t, and which is less than 1. The remaining is at most 1 because t runs between 0 and 1. So this coded function again at every point t is below that constant, and therefore the maximum of mod fx at the point t is less than or equal to norm x infinity, for 0 is equal to t less than or equal to 1. Therefore f is bound, therefore norm of f x infinity is less than or equal to norm x. So therefore f is bounded, and in fact the norm of the transformation is less than or equal to 1, because the ratio of the change length to the original length is at most 1. The ratio of the change length to original length is at most 1. So therefore f is bounded. So we have a bounded linear transformation from x to y. Is it 1, 1? Well, fx equal to fy means integral 0 to t xu du is equal to integral 0 to t yu du for every t. The two functions are the same, therefore at every point they must be same. But then I can differentiate this, both sides. I will get x of t. Why can I differentiate? Because the integral of a continuous function is differentiable. So I can differentiate this, get xt equal to yt for every t, which means the two functions are the same. So therefore f is 1, 1. Is it on 2? What does that mean? Give me any function here. Is this the code of somebody? So if you give me a g in y, what does that mean? G is continuously differentiable and g0 is 0. These two are given to me. G is in y, therefore it is continuous. So now therefore look at what do I say? G prime t. Can you talk about G prime t? I can, because G is a differentiable function. Look at G prime t. G is continuously differentiable, so its derivative must be a continuous function. So G prime t belongs to C01. Call it x. Well, I call it y. Okay. Huh? Okay, doesn't matter. Call it x. Call it x of t. Then x of t belongs to x, and what about f of x of t? By definition that is 0 to t xu du, but x is g prime u du, which is g of t minus g of 0, but what is g of 0? 0, so that is g of t. So therefore f of x is equal to g for every t. Therefore for every g in y there exists x in x such that fx equal to g. Therefore f on 2. So now I have a 1, 1 onto linear transformation. That 1, 1 onto as before makes therefore f. Okay, let me quickly sum it up. F is 1, 1 onto bounded linear transformation. these two together tell F inverse is defined as a linear transformation from y to x. The one on to says inverse is defined. The moment you have inverse of linear, the linearity forces linearity of F inverse also. The question is about bounded. We will show that it is not bounded. How do I show that it is not bounded? For every elastic limit you put, somebody exceeds that limit. That's what we want to show. So in other words, we should say give me any positive integer n. There is a function gn such that the norm of f infinity, f inverse of gn exceeds n times the norm of g. So take gn equal to x to the power of n, n equal to 1, 2, etc. Are these functions continuous? Yes. Are these functions differentiable? Yes. So gn's belong to what? And what is the norm of all these fellows? It's all 1. The maximum is 1. It will be attained at x equal to 1. So now I'll come back here. What is F inverse of Gn? What is the definition of F inverse of Gn? To get the inverse of G, I must differentiate that. Remember, I let x to be equal to Gn prime. So that is Gn prime. So Fn is Gn prime t, which is n x to the power of n t to the power of n minus. I should write all t's. Okay, Gn t. Okay, because I use the letter t for this. So F inverse Gn t, Gn prime t, which is n t to the power of n minus 1. Therefore, the maximum, which is this, is equal to n. Okay, which is n times norm of Gn infinity. Therefore, for every n, there exists Gn in y such that this ratio with norm Gn equal to 1, such that F inverse Gn infinity divided by norm Gn infinity is equal to n. That means for every limit, for every elastic limit, there is one fellow who reaches that. So you cannot, if you want to put n plus 1, there is a fellow who reaches that also. So what will be the supremum of all these fellows? There will be more than all the n's, and therefore it will be infinity. Therefore, sup norm F inverse G divided by norm G, where G belongs to y, G not equal to 0 is infinity. Therefore, F inverse not bounded. So therefore, the boundedness of F failed to force boundedness of F inverse. Okay. So that's where we run into difficulties when you come to non-linear spaces, infinite dimensional non-linear spaces. Whereas in infinite dimensional vector spaces, the moment F inverse existed, it is forced to be linear. But in infinite dimensional non-linear spaces, even if F inverse exists, even though it was linear, even though the original fellow was bounded, the inverse fellow need not be bounded. Okay. The question therefore is, what was the difference between those two examples? Why did it happen in the first example? Why did it not happen in the second example? Or in other words, when does this happen? And that is what is known as the open mapping theorem. The very famous open mapping theorem is, when is that boundedness forced on inverse also? If we have a 1-1 onto linear bounded linear transformation, when is the boundedness forced on the inverse also? And that's what the open mapping theorem. I think I will do that in the next class.